Welcome back everyone to Creator in Conversation, the official podcast of TASQ Art, Ireland's premier academy towards sequential art design and production, aka comic books. My name is Owen Macaulay. I am your host and I'm the president behind TASQ Art and the founding publisher of Lightning Strike Comics. Since 2011 I've been publishing comics, making comics, selling comics, and among my tenure as an editor, a publisher and a teacher, I've had the great privilege to work on a character called the Phantom. The Phantom was created by Lee Falk in 1936 as a comic strip character. Often people equate Superman as being the first costume superhero, but his first appearance appeared in comic books in 1938. The Phantom predates that, however, he owes his origins within the comic strip form. Mr. Cy Barry is one of the most prominent artists who has worked on the character of the Phantom, and during his tenure, the Phantom rose to such popularity as being read by over 100 million people around the world in multiple different languages through newspaper syndication. I go on for hours about the contributions of Mr. Barry's work towards the Phantom, but I don't have to, because we have a very special project coming up. Joining me today in this episode of Creator in Conversation is David Barry, the son of Cy Barry. David has a special project that he's working on. He hopes to tell a professional biography about his father. But not just that, he's also looking to lead a little bit more into the man behind the artist as well, who is Cy Barry, his upbringing, his secret origin as it were, and what defined him to be the artist and the creator we all know him to be. David approached me a number of months back about this project, asking would Lightning Strike Comics be interested in publishing. Absolutely, but there were certain considerations to make, such as the format the text will take, the capabilities and limitations of Lightning Strike as a publisher, and overall ensuring a very strong quality to this publication. Ultimately, the approach that we're taking is that myself and David will be meeting through a number of Zoom calls. These Zoom calls will be essentially interviews using material and notes that David has recorded to help flesh out the narrative of the story. We'll also supplement this with interviews and conversations with other creators who know Mr. Barry and his many contributions to the Phantom legacy. We will then release these stories in a chapter format, first as a magazine, both in print and digital, and then we will strive to collect all these magazines as a single box set. Furthermore, the goal is to ultimately collect everything as a single hardback collected coffee table book as well, telling the complete work and story of Cy Barry. There are a number of considerations to take with regards to this project, such as licensing and permission of some of the images used. Yes, Mr. Barry illustrated the Phantom, but also he didn't own that character. It's a copyright production of Kingfisher's syndicate of the Hearst Corporation. So we're going to put together the material and the pitch. What you're hearing is our first conversation on the record. So this is a conversation between myself and David. I approached David with the idea of including this conversation as an episode of Creator in Conversation, so that you, the listener, could hear what we intend to provide, some of the really interesting stories about Cy and his life and his career and his professional relationships. And I would say to you all listening, if you enjoy what you hear, please do comment and let us know. That type of feedback will be essential when we're going towards licensors and other publishers to ensure the longevity and the completion of this project. And again, Mr. Barry's contributions to comics don't just lie with the Phantom, of course. He's done so much in other strips as well, Tarzan, Flash Gordon, but also those of you going to see the upcoming Superman film by James Gunn, you will notice it will feature Krypto the Superdog, and it was actually Mr. Cy Barry who inked that very first story as well, and we talk a little bit about that with David in today's episode. I really sincerely want to thank David for his time in this episode. I was kind of putting him on the spot a bit to do a podcast, but he really shared some great insights, and I think after listening to this, everyone will be very excited to hear about the final book and to support that project as well. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode and this conversation with David Barry. And welcome back, everyone, to Creator in Conversation. Today we have a very special episode. Joining us is David Barry, the son of the legendary phantom artist Cy Barry. And he's joining me here today in relation to a special project that we've been talking about for a number of months now that's in very R&D stages. As of yet, there's no exact release date, publishing schedule. We're not that far down the production pipeline, but the intent is we are looking to create a special biography, a professional biography of the life and career of Mr. Cy Barry. And we're putting this episode out for all the Phantom fans around the world who are great admirers of Mr. Barry's work to get a little taste of what could potentially be in this final text. The text will be composed through a series of interviews, and myself and David thought it'd be fun if we were to take the first interview we were doing together and put it out onto the podcast. So really, folks, those of you listening in, if you enjoy what you hear, please, by all means, shout from the rooftops, send us emails, comment, like and subscribe below. And this will let us know, because there'll be a long process. Putting together the text will be fairly straightforward for us, we feel, in terms of the stories and content, but there will be a permission process for the release of artwork from the companies Mr. Barry's worked for, like King Feature Syndicate, DC Comics, so many more. So what will happen is the more we know there's a market demand, the sooner we'll get this project out into the world, into your hands. So that's the sponsor ad for the start of the show. But David, how are you today, David?
I'm doing great, Ian. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Actually, you know what, David? I actually have to formally introduce myself to you as Owen, which will be Owen, because my name in Irish, so you know the name Owen, that's Owen, that's the actual original.
Sure.
My name, Eoin, is the original spelling, but when the English invaded, they made us all spell our name phonetically. So my apologies, because my name's actually written in Irish, but I've never actually pronounced my name for you. So there you go. So just to confuse you for that, I'm like Scooby-Doo.
No problem.
I'm taking the mask off now, and it's like, no, it's not Ian, it's Owen. But
that sounds great.
So today, this project, first of all, just before we get into some questions and speaking about the illustrious career and, of course, the background, we want to get to know the person as well of Cy Barry, not just the artist as well. But what was the impetus? What was the drive for this particular project? I get a sense this is a long-burning passion project that you've wanted to carry out for some time.
Yeah, it is. I just feel that my father is so well known for the Phantom and may not be as known for some of the other titles he's worked on going back to the late 1940s, that I really wanted to just put together a book that was a tribute to his career and life. I also think that, I'm sure we'll talk about this later, so many people know so much about my father's professional life, but may not know a lot about his childhood and what he went through and what makes him tick, and the struggles he had growing up during the Depression years. And so I just wanted to put together something that would be permanent, documented, for a lot of reasons. One included, and I want to do that. One of the reasons is he happens to be the last remaining Barry in his line of siblings. So he was the third youngest in his family of 8 growing up during the Depression in New York City. And I just felt that it was necessary for our family, for fans, and for friends to know a little bit more about him.
It's a very touching sentiment as well, and it's also something which thematically I find myself coming back to quite a bit within this podcast. I've had conversations with a couple of other noted names and creators in the industry, like Elliot S. Magan, Paul Levitz, and what we ended up gravitating towards were how the sense of representation, identity, a shared story in comics, the collaborative nature. But what this project for your father will be is also sharing his story. We're going once more to that sense of collaboration. And my own undergraduate was in history, so this is great opportunity for you to marry my many passions. For those who might be listening who might not be the huge Phantom fans, obviously I have a good association with the character because we've been publishing with Light and Strike Comics since 2016, so next year it'll be 10 years since I've been myself a Phantom Insane. But at this point of recording, we're recording this in mid-June, and next month we'll see the release of Superman returning to the big screen. And James Gunn from Guardians of the Galaxy, he is taking the rounds as the director for the film, and featured in it now would be the character of Krypto, the super dog, Superman's pet dog. And your father, if those are unaware with his work beforehand, are suddenly going to really see his name back in focus through various reprints, because he has a significant connection to Krypto. Isn't that correct?
Yes, he does. He worked as an inker for Superman during the 1950s. He didn't do a tremendous amount of work for DC on that title, but he definitely had his hands in Superman, Superboy, and just so many other titles from DC and Marvel timely. Yep. Yeah.
And the very first...
But I'm sorry.
I was like, go ahead.
You may know the story as well as I do, but, he, I don't know if he was asked to come up with an idea for this concept for this new character, the dog, but somehow he had his hands in it. And he thought he had it down. It was a little more like a dog wolf, as opposed to, this white dog who, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Like a Labrador kind of,
exactly,
yeah. And
yeah,
because it's interesting is the very first appearance of Krypto himself that was inked by Cy, and that story now since the 50s now getting huge reprints, because Krypto never really had that mainstream focus, I think, as much. Ironically, there was an animated film, Super Pets, not so long ago, Dwayne The Rock Johnson, but seeing in live action representation, it's going to be exciting because people I've seen the book being reprinted. So let's go back to the very beginning, I suppose, from your point of view. Let's begin with your story, David, of, well, what was it like growing up with Cy Barry as your father? Obviously, to give folks just a little bit more of a perspective of Cy Barry's career, he, at the time of his work on the Phantom, we're talking hundreds of millions of readers around the world through syndication would read these strips. To this day, those numbers have never been, even in the internet age, have never been matched again. And of course, the comic strip was so important, going back even further, going back to like the 30s, the 40s, because even then there was no, colour TV, everything was black and white. Home entertainment wasn't as prolific, but you were guaranteed at least to have the newspaper in your house. So syndication and such so important. For yourself, David, with Cy being your father, was there ever the impetus or desire or perhaps the inkling that you might follow in his footsteps in a comic book based career or anything like that early on? Or
I don't know. Maybe that was his wish, but I don't think it was ever mine. Later in life, I started picking up a pen and pencil and some watercolors. But when I was younger, I had no idea that, what I wanted to do, number one. And number two, I didn't see myself as an artist. Although many of my cousins, my dad's family was very artistic. Many of my cousins picked up graphic design and illustration. and made a professional career out of it. But I didn't really see it. And to be quite honest, not that this necessarily relates, but I just had no idea how popular my father was, the scope of his popularity. Um, just really never had a clue. And I mean, maybe if I did, I would have felt more compelled to follow in his footsteps. Yeah.
So growing up, did Cy have a home studio, or did he?
Yeah.
And he did. Okay. And
During my time,
okay.
once we moved to Long Island in New York, he had a studio in the basement. He also used to work at home when they lived prior to that in Brooklyn, New York. But he mostly rented studios with other artists working together. I mean, he shared a studio with his brother Dan for many years and moved. And I think he worked with Alex Toth a little bit in his studio. So he moved around, at different offices in Manhattan. And yeah, but he had a home office, and that was great. But there was some downside to it, especially during my high school years. I just having dad home all day kind of put a damper on my troublemaking. But I found a way to make trouble anyway. Yeah. So he was home all day long, and he had this crazy sleeping habit of waking up late in the morning, very difficult to wake, and have his breakfast, go down and start working at 10, 11 o'clock, and really wouldn't stop until dinner. Maybe took a lunch break there. Would have dinner with us and would make his way down to his studio again. And he worked just crazy hours. He worked until 2 o'clock in the morning very often. But I'll tell you, I got to appreciate what it meant to work hard. And but I think he paid the price for that. Maybe the family did as well, to a greater or lesser extent. Having him working all the time. And, he was always on a rush to make a deadline. Monday afternoon, we had to deliver 7 days worth of artwork to King Features, and sometimes it meant literally getting in the car, driving through traffic to Manhattan to drop it off at King Features in Midtown. And but he was always in a rush to make deadline, and it was a tough life. It's almost like being in sales and having a quota every month. You're gonna have your good months and your bad months, but no, for him it was he always seemed to be working, and I think he did pay a price for that to a greater or lesser extent, and so did the family. We didn't have a lot of time together with him that I recall. Yeah. And I suspect that my sisters even had less time with him when he was freelancing and really had a hustle for work. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a story that does sound familiar to other creators at the time as well. I was a huge comic book nut, so wherever I see like documentaries, interviews, if I'm not making them, I'm watching them, you can guarantee. But there's a great kind of a mini, I think it's the Jack Kirby Museum. Even Kirby's family was saying exactly similar to your father. He would go in all day at the drawing board, and someone once asked him, like, why is he do so much? He's like, well, that's the job. He has a mortgage, he has a family. This is it. Now, so my understanding from what you were saying there is that so your father was present probably around the house, but he was immersed in his work. You yourself didn't pursue the path of the artist. That wasn't of your particular interest. But your father then, when he did get the work out there to, as I mentioned, hundreds of millions of readers around the world in multiple different languages through King Feature Syndicate have read it as the peak of the popularity of the strip. At what stage then did you become aware that maybe your your father had fans, like there were fanboys out there, really.
Oh,
Were you like a kid, or was it much later that folks knock at the door saying, "Hey, hi, is Cy Barry home?"
no, but two guys that did come knocking quite often were Ed Rhodes and Pete Klaus, who, we'll talk about this later, I'm sure, but, two of the initial creators of Friends of the Phantom, which was, I think, which was a publication that they put together on Phantom, not necessarily geared towards my father, but to many contributing artists and Phantom artists from the past. But, they were always seeking my dad for more information. But it really wasn't until the internet age and my discovery of the Phantom groups on Facebook and Instagram that I had some semblance of how popular he was internationally.
Yeah.
And also, when he first went to Australia in 1998, I believe,
Oh, great.
he came back with just wild stories of people, lining the convention hall just get his autograph, and I was like, "What?" It was like, you're kidding me. I thought you were just going to go try to, hustle some dailies and Sundays. But it turned out that people really wanted to see you. And so it was slowly I got to recognize just how popular he was. But it really was not until the internet age that I really had any appreciation of what was going on.
It's so fascinating because a lot of that type of a story or your experience with your fathers is similar to other comic creators. There's a gentleman called Don Rosa who is world renowned for his Donald Duck, Scrooge McDuck comics, and there was a period of time where Disney, it's similar to how King Features operate, although Cy would produce the Phantom, like he doesn't own the Phantom, doesn't own the characters or the images, it's copyright his. And then from my own experience as a Lightning Strike, we make a story, we have a license, but then when the license is up, we don't own it. If someone else wants to republish it and license it from King Features, they can. So with Donald Duck, for example, Egmont, which also reprints a lot of the Phantom material, reprinted huge Scrooge McDuck books. Don Rosa thought no one really cared for his work, or it wasn't as popular. There's kind of a wilderness years where he fell out with Disney. But Egmont said, well, we'll commission you for original. He goes to Scandinavia, and like your father in Australia, he was out the door. And so it's like, it's insane. But like, when did your father then kind of become aware then he had fans? Like, if he went to Australia, did he know like there would be queues, or was that also a surprise?
No, I think it was definitely a surprise to him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely a surprise to him.
It's
to recognize that.
Yeah, and it's just so curious. Obviously now with the age of social media, it's easier for the artists, for better or worse, to communicate directly with the audience. But back then, it just goes to show how easy it was for companies to make them feel insular. And maybe it wasn't a consideration. Like, people just didn't realize, there's now in a day and age of comic conventions, that's a whole other business element. But back then, not so much a consideration. And you got to wonder, like, how many, with social media connects us, but how much could have been creators, oblivious to their fan base. So that's a little bit just on your early years and obviously personal connection with your father and his connection to his fans. But let's detach for a moment from Cy Barry, world famous artist and Phantom creator. Let's take it back to Cy Barry the man. What was his secret origin as a person? Like you mentioned, he grew up during like the Depression era. Was he always an artist? Did he always intend to break into sequential art like comic strips and comic books? So who is he and how did he come to be?
Yeah. Well, he's a very complex guy. Talented with his artwork. Little bit of a hot head. I mean, he's got Like he's a tremendously loving and caring person, cares about his family and friends, and easily makes friends. But he had a very difficult childhood. Um, and I think that what he went through absolutely contributed to the guy he is, or maybe was, because he's mellowed quite a bit. But, this is someone who was born back in New York City in 1928 during the heart of the Depression. His mother became ill in the hospital after he was delivered. So he was born in Manhattan, and his mom, although rest of his family was from Brooklyn, from Sheepshead Bay, he was born in Manhattan because his mother had been visiting her sister while pregnant at her home in Manhattan. So he was born at a hospital in Manhattan. His mom got sick, and he got sick with the flu. They were very poor. She made a decision to put him in an infant's orphanage. And again, we'll talk more about it. But I mean, from a familial point of view, he was not the other one. He was not the only one who was fostered or sent to an orphanage at an early age. A couple of his other brothers and sisters were as well. He was the sixth youngest in the family of 8. He was eventually fostered at the age of 5 to a foster family that lived in the Bronx, in New York.
Mm-hmm.
And he had several years of being with a very loving foster family that took him in and treated him as one of their own. And I think had it not been for that experience, and for the fact that he met my mom, the woman that she was, that he came out to be a really loving guy. Because when he was forced to move back home at the age of 10, which he didn't want to do, he found a very tumultuous and toxic household with my grandmother, who was just abusive, physically abusive to the kids, completely unprepared as a person to have that many children.
And what led to the ending of the fostering then? Because the story there, that's something which was sadly during those economic times common enough.
I think they might have been.
But why 10? What changed at 10 that led him to? It was just okay.
I suspect that it had to do with the fact that by the late 1930s, early 1940s, my grandfather was kind of back to work again, and things were a little better, and the city of New York felt like, he's got to go home. Certainly not that he wanted to. Because he had first experienced some of the family at the age of 5. And he recalls to me how he was coming up the steps to their apartment building, and he heard shouting and screaming. And it happened to be coming from his apartment, my grandmother's apartment. And he knew immediately, wow, this is really different than anything I've ever experienced before. I don't think I like this. And at the age of 10, he was extremely upset about having to move home.
Mm-hmm. And just as a sidebar, this is pure speculation comment on my part, just trying to read between the art and the artist. But in his collaboration with Mr. Lee Falk, would there have been any back and forth on the stories, or would it have always been Mr. Falk who advised this, like he provided the script, the narrative? The reason I ask is because obviously the idea of fostering like the Rex King, the character within the script, I often wonder when I see obviously they are real flesh and blood people behind these stories. They're not out there swinging
Yeah.
out off buildings and caves, but they are, you know, perhaps a sense of you know, their own lived experiences shining through into the work. Do you, any indication that perhaps, you know, Cy might have been, you know, filling in some or leaning in some of his own experiences, the sense of fostering or something into his work, channeling that? Or...
Well, it's entirely possible. I know that my dad was not very involved in the creative process of what Lee ultimately came up with, but I know that my dad was very influential in bringing the Phantom, encouraging Lee to bring the Phantom into the modern age.
Yeah.
Meaning, you know, from the Jungle Patrol being kind of a mixed audience to, you know, some of the changes that were made to the local government. We saw it become more realistic for its day. And, but, you know, I think that my dad definitely contributed to the popularity of the Phantom because of what he brought to it with action, compassion, realism. That he definitely brought to the strip. But I don't know how much he really collaborated with Lee on the stories themselves.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
From a week to, you know, from a week to week basis.
Yeah, yeah. As I was saying, just pure speculation. Since these things are coincidental as well, but it's interesting how the symmetry can just sometimes match up. So back to his earlier. So about age 10, he returns home to his family, his grandmother's and family life. It's abusive. It's complicated. What, and you were saying a lot turns around when you meet your mother, but in the in-between years, so from 10 onwards, when does he start to emerge or express an interest as an artist? How's the rest of his childhood to teen years? What's some of the pivotal moments along the road there?
Well, he was drawing. He says that he was drawing from the time he was about 5 years old and could hold a pencil. Was always drawing something. Usually he liked to draw from nature, and he liked to draw the human body. And I think he always saw himself becoming a magazine illustrator or doing more in terms of illustration than comics.
Oh.
Yeah.
That would have been big money back then as well, particularly with pulps and magazines. There would have been, you know, like with the illustrations.
But by the time, I'm sorry, and I was just, before I forget, you know, it was around 10 years old that he had to come back home, only to discover that his brother Dan, who was 6 or 7 years older than him, I think, was already starting his career in art, in comics.
Oh, wow.
And saw what he was doing, and they worked together, you know, on Flash Gordon, and they worked together on Tarzan, and they, you know, collaborated quite a bit on some of those. But you know, it was at an early age he realized he might have something here.
And what form did the collaboration on Tarzan and Flash Gordon take? Was that penciling and inks or a combination of both?
I believe so. Yeah,
very good.
I think it was penciling and ink. Dan would do some of the work, and my dad would finish up.
Great. And so, in a way, would it have been almost like an apprentice? Like, did your father have any formal training in terms of art, or did he learn by self-taught? Oh, he did, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Interesting story, which kind of talks to the tumultuous nature of his childhood. He told me he'd been to 3 different junior high schools and 4 different high schools between the time he was, you know, 11 or 12 years old till the time that he was accepted into the School of Industrial Art in Manhattan and went to art school there. So he was constantly moving. He constantly because he couldn't stand being home. He would move in with his uh, paternal grandmother. He moved in with his maternal aunts.
Mhm.
Oftentimes lived with his sister, his oldest sister, and was constantly moving. His paperwork was always missing. But he did eventually get into the School of Industrial Art, where he met Joe Giella, Al Scaduto, Emilio Squiglio, who worked on Captain America, I believe.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, I think so. And just met some great friends at the School of Industrial Art. So he was formally trained, and kind of got into the business. Got his first breaks in the late 1940s.
Excellent. And
Yeah.
along the way, then, at what point did your mother come across meet with your father? Then would have that been, was he a well established artist by then, or would have been early in
No.
his career?
Oh no,
No,
he was
so,
he was 17, 16, 17. And
so
my mom was 16. No, my dad would have been 17. My mom was maybe 15
and how did
when
they
they
meet?
first met, through a mutual friend of my mom's.
Very good.
My um, so my father's brother, my uncle Ray,
Mhm.
was married, and his wife was my mom's best friend, and they were introduced. So he was introduced through my uncle and his girlfriend or wife at the time. And, finally he moved into a home and was accepted into the home where he saw love and he saw affection and people who cared. Uh, you know, in his home in Brooklyn, where growing up with his mother, everything was kind of focused on money, making money for the family. And I think his upbringing really set him up for the short temper, defensiveness and stubbornness that kind of surrounded him throughout his life. But had it not been for my mom and her family taking him in, um, he could have been a very different person, way more bitter and than he sometimes can be about the way he was kind of shortchanged, not only by his family but by people he worked with too, including Lee and his brother Dan.
What creative frustrations? Obviously, we mentioned about the collaborative nature of
Yeah,
comics, but I can imagine, I know in my own experience that some of my professional colleagues I would see more weekly than my own family. It's like you call them your
mm,
work wife or something. But would that be something which, like, what was the relationship like with Falk and Barry? Was it a conciliatory one, or was it more antagonistic at times, or was it just
I
professional?
think it was more antagonistic.
Okay,
It was not, and I think that you know my father attributes it to Lee's ego, which I don't know Lee, didn't know him at all. Would see him at some events at King Features and things like that, but I didn't know him. But he really upset my father a lot in terms of the back and forth that they had to have. Um, Anytime my dad wanted to get caught up and ahead of the game, knowing that he was going to take a vacation, Lee would jerk him around and not get him the script that he needed. And he just played a lot of games with him and really made my dad try to feel like he was somehow subordinate
Mm.
in the sense that my dad was contributing greatly to the success of the Phantom. I mean, when he took it over in 61, 62, they had maybe 100 million readers, and
Mhm.
by 63 I think they were up to like 115, 117. but he felt like Lee was always trying to put him below him. I mean, granted, Lee had significant portion of the royalties, and my dad had far less handle on that pool.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't need to be that way. I mean, he embarrassed my father in public on a couple of occasions, and my father was upset and let him know. So it was. They didn't communicate often, but when they did, it was tense.
Okay. And
Yeah,
how did Sai, and this is probably just skipping ahead just a little bit, and we
yeah.
won't go into too much detail. With this is for the sake, I suppose, for this episode of the podcast, and more we can elaborate when the book. But if for such an antagonistic relationship, why stick onto the strip, or how? First of all, how did Sai find his way onto the Phantom, and then what compelled him to stay once he began? Like, I assume he must have a real affection for the character as well.
Oh, he does. And he always says that when he was younger and would read The Phantom, he always felt like that was a strip he'd really like to work on. I'd like to really update that. I'd like to bring more action and emotion into the strip, more realism, and which I think he did eventually do. But he was working in the late 50s for DC and Marvel timely, with Stan Lee on a couple of titles. He was working romance. I think he was kind of working in the romance genre for DC in the late 50s when he and another artist, and I can't recall who it is, came up with an idea for a strip and took it to King Features. And at the time that all of this was going on, Wilson McCoy was ill.
Okay.
And because of their interaction with my dad and because of their knowledge of his work, they gave him the opportunity to take the strip on a temporary basis while Wilson was recovering, and it just became a permanent deal. I mean, Wilson McCoy passed away, unfortunately, and my dad was, but I know that there was, Bill Lignante was involved for a very short time during that transition.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, they gave both the dailies and the Sundays to my dad.
Yeah.
And that would have been in 61.
It often is, unfortunately, the process which exists to this day. Like, King Features do act fast when unforeseen circumstances, illness, there have to be fill-in artists, and sometimes that does lead to a succession within the strip. So obviously, so your father was a fan of the Phantom from his younger years himself, and then when the opportunity arose, he sees that Mr. Falk, more antagonistic, big over sense of ego, led to contention between the two. But his passion and his what he brought to the character, the Phantom, Mr. Barry, sticks with the strip. And as we mentioned, statistically, as they say, the numbers don't lie. The strip's found new, like, to this day holds the record. To this day in the modern era of the internet. And
the Phantom was struggling at the time. Financially, for King Features, and that's my understanding. That's what I've read, and if that's the case, he certainly helped to turn it around.
Jumping ahead a couple more decades, and this is a quick now, just out of curiosity.
Yeah.
In '96, Phantom arrives in the big screen with the Billy Zane depiction. How did your father find any traction, interest within the film depiction of it, or is that just something he didn't see any of his Phantom with it?
He had no input at that time to the creative process. He had some financial interest in it, but the movie lost money, and so he didn't. It was a money loser. So, needless to say, he walked away with nothing in his pocket. But no, he really he knew about the movie coming,
Mhm. Yeah,
and but he, unlike Lee, he didn't really have any input into the creative process.
yeah, and that's and
Yeah, and I don't think he felt like it was a very good movie
yeah, yeah,
in general. Uh, yeah, I mean, Billy Zane was great, but some of the other storytelling was could have been better.
yeah.
You
His
know, and yeah.
I agree with those sentiments. Like Billy Zane, Christopher Reeve, the two of them, something about that energy and charisma they bring to the
Mm,
characters. I look forward to seeing more actors embody that. Sometimes it can be a little too serious, at times.
yeah.
Uh, what's amazing with this conversation that we're having, David, is that your father's story is definitely one that's almost akin to anything of, it's a little bit Dickensian at times, but it's also something of the superhero in the origin itself. It's
Mm,
the unconventional, starting the world, going up against so many odds. Like the world was literally against your father, economically in terms of familial connections. The struggle since the start, and perhaps that's why there's no better person to carry the torch of helping to depict one of the world's oldest, most influential heroes as
mm,
well, such as the Phantom.
yeah.
What would you like to say about your father, about his particular journey? About this journey you've embarked on, telling his story. Like, what would you like to bring into focus with this particular project?
Well, great question. I just want my dad to know that I embarked on this journey because I'm proud of him, and to let him know that he did overcome a lot. He deserves some recognition that I don't even think he realizes that he deserves, or he's very humble, about his work in the past and the people that he worked with, the Carmine Infantinos, the Kurt Swans,
Mm-hmm.
the Alex Toths. I mean, just so many artists. Um, he did that in a business that's uh, always recognized creators and pencilers and cover artists ahead of accomplished inkers. And I just felt like I want you to have a little time in the spotlight and for people to recognize what contributions you brought to the industry,
Mm-hmm.
how you um, how you fostered many up and coming artists over the years and encouraged them and counseled them and coached them. What a giving person you were. Um, you know, using pen and brush, he became quite a master storyteller and perhaps little known go-to inker for, people like Swan and Gil Kane and many others. But I think more than that, I really want him to feel proud of what he's accomplished in his writing. And that's really why I'm doing it and what my motivation is. He doesn't know about this project that I'm working on. He thinks, with the many questions I've been pestering with him with over the last few weeks, he thinks I'm putting together more of a familial memoir,
Mm-hmm.
and more of a memoir so that we get the family history, down,
Yeah.
you know, that kind of thing. So that's what's driving me.
And it's so important as well. As I mentioned, my undergraduate was in history, and sometimes, like, history is such a broad topic. You're talking about social history, history of the arts, history of commerce, history of this and
Mm,
that. But no matter what, one of the first things is, what is a culture? Well, a culture can be represented by its people, of course, but also they're not just living in isolation. We tell stories, we entertain each other. there's more to us. Like, we don't just live to walk. There's more to us. And as I mentioned earlier on, there's real flesh and blood people behind these stories and this art.
True.
And therefore, it's important that we do make a record, and we do record this for the subsequent generations, and everyone has a right who contributes to share their story. Before we close out this episode, David, would it be okay if I just give a quick run through of our initial proposal for the book outline?
Absolutely.
Great. So for our listeners, this is just a brief taster. Myself and David will be having a number of these calls back and forth as we record and document the necessary material for the text. How we're approaching this is that the main goal is to have a single, coffee table text for everyone available, but we're going to be ideally aiming from a production point of view to release the book in a couple of different formats first. So each chapter of the book will also be released separately as a magazine format. This magazine will be available both in print and digital. The first chapter will primarily look towards Cy's childhood, which we touched upon here in today's episode. Will then lead into the second part of that book, his early years in comics into the 1940s, which we touched upon, but there's a lot more to go into, such as the publishers and editors he worked with, multiple different stories and titles involved in, and more of his mentors. Book 2, we'll be looking at into the 1950s, such as who he freelanced for, who bring into focus more of his time at National, DC Comics, Timely, Marvel Comics, and the many others as well, and his various collaborators ranging from Alex Toth, Bob Kane, Stan Lee, as we mentioned, Carmen Infantino, Kurt Swan, John Romita Sr. I will also talk about his impact on the industry during this period, and his impact, as you mentioned at the start of this episode, on Krypto's design as well. Also, stuff which, we'll have to pick up the book to get, but his work on the Martin Luther King Montgomery story as well, which is going to be really, really insightful and exciting to share with the world as well. By book 3, this will be where a lot of the Phantom fans will want to be picking up, because this is going to take us into his Phantom years as well. Overall, you're talking about 33 years, and that's 10,296 daily strips, 1,716 Sunday pages. That's making me dizzy saying those numbers.
I know, it's so funny you say that. My math was a little bit different, but but right in there with you, I think.
We're gonna have to sit down and count. It's all right. I'm happy to read it all.
Whatever it is, it's a lot.
Yeah,
it's a lot of work.
And then we also be talking a little bit more about his travels to like Australia. He made to Scandinavia as well, did he? To the Phantom fans there.
I think it's 2001. Yeah,
brilliant. So there's so much more. We'll be also reaching out to and speaking with some Phantom fans and other collaborators as well. Whoever we can find, we'll try to get them on record. So for those of you listening, thank you for tuning in to Creator in Conversation. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, I kindly request you like and subscribe. We might have further episodes or updates in the project throughout the podcast series here as well. This podcast is actually also a branch of TASQ Art, which is an academy based in Dublin, Ireland, dedicated to sequential art design and production. Essentially, it's a comic book academy. So if you're passionate about the medium and the stories, feel free to check out other episodes as well. And what's really important, if you can, those of you listening, we'll have this out on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Audible, wherever you get your podcasts, really. Let us know. You can email me directly at info@tasqart, that's TASQ, art.com. So info@tasqart.com, and I'll be happy to take on board any comments. You might have suggestions. If you want to come up with a counter to anything you've heard here as well, and you have the receipts, you would take that as well, whatever you want to bring. And David, anything else you wish to share in closing for this first episode?
No, I just really look forward to sharing some more of his history and stories, and can't wait to get going.
Awesome. Until next time, thanks again, Barry. Talk soon. Many thanks again to everyone for listening to this episode of Create and Conversation. My thanks again to David Barry for taking this opportunity and sharing this project with me. I hope you all enjoyed what you've heard. If you have, again, please do consider like and subscribing to the podcast, but also comment or email us at info@taskart.com and let us know if you're excited or be interested in reading or buying this project as well. For more upcoming masterclasses, such as the Frank Miller Masterclass, among others with TASQ Art, please visit taskart.com or find us at TASQ Art, that's TASQART, on X, Facebook, Instagram, and follow this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, this is a copyright production of Macaulay Consultancy 2025.